Welcome. Thank you, all of you, for tuning in and joining us for the latest Oceanographic Roundtable discussion. Thank you all for your patience as we there ironed out a few wrinkles in the green room behind the scenes there as we're just getting back into the swing of things after a lovely Easter couple of days off. And I hope that you all enjoyed your time off as well, wherever you chose to spend them. It's great to see such a robust audience join us online for this event. For anyone keeping track, though I think at this point it might just be myself. This is Roundtable number 5 in our ongoing series of weekly Roundtable events. It's a chance each week for oceanographic audiences around the globe to join us as we dissect and dive into some of the biggest headlines across the ocean news and ocean storytelling space. Regular participants will notice that today I have returned to our usual setting here in the Oceanographic London office, having survived the wilds of Edinburgh last week. Now, already in this series of live discussions, we have tackled the topics of the UK sewage crisis, the effectiveness of marine protected areas, the pervasiveness of microplastics, and lastly, the stark warnings of the World Meteorological Organization's latest report telling us that all key climate change indicators are now turning red. While we would definitely like to be covering some of the more positive developments in ocean news, I'm not afraid of covering the hardest hitting topics. And today is no different, because today we are tackling the topic of bottom trawling. Not just bottom trawling, but a new report that stands in direct opposition to the long-held argument that trawling is an essential fishing practice for feeding a growing population. So here's a bit of background to that story. A news story broke last week that industrial bottom trawling is one of the most dominant forces in global fisheries, accounted for more than a quarter of all marine fish caught worldwide. For decades, it has been promoted as essential to feeding a growing global population. But a new international study is challenging that narrative head on. The research led by today's guests analysed 9 case studies across Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania, and the Americas, and found a consistent pattern. That rather than supporting food security, industrial bottom trawling is frequently undermining it, displacing small-scale fishers, degrading coastal habitats, and diverting nutritious fish away from the communities that depend on them the most. The findings arrive at a moment when global fisheries governance is under increasing scrutiny, and when the question of who the ocean actually feeds is becoming impossible to ignore. So it's a big topic and one ripe for big conversation. So let's meet the experts ready to dive into it. And today I am joined by none other than Professor Rashid Soumaila, a professor of ocean and fisheries economics at the University of British Columbia, Canada, and director of the Fisheries Economics Research Unit at the UBC Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries. One of the world's leading authorities on the economics of marine systems, his work spans fisheries subsidies, ocean governance, climate change impacts on fisheries, and the social equity dimensions of how the ocean is managed and used. Over the course of a distinguished career, he has advised governments, international bodies, and conservation organizations on some of the most pressing questions in global fisheries policy. Professor Soumaila is a co-author of that very new international study on the impact of bottom trawling on food security. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me and for doing this, because collaboration between scientists and journalists, I think, is crucial in getting information to the public, to the people who can actually do something with them. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Not at all. It's an absolute honor and a privilege to have you here with us. We are also going to be joined, fingers crossed. Now, there's been a few technical glitches behind the scenes, but if she is there on time, Dr. Anna Schubauer. Dr. Schubauer is a fisheries researcher and postdoctoral research fellow at the University of British Columbia, where her work sits at the intersection of fisheries, economics, food security, and ocean governance. Her research focuses on the social and economic dimensions of fisheries systems, examining not just how much fish is caught, but who catches it, who benefits from it, and who is left behind when industrial fishing expands at the expense of coastal communities. Dr. Schubauer is the lead author of this major new international study on the impact of bottom trawling on food security, which she conducted in partnership with the Transform Bottom Trawling Coalition and marine conservation NGO Blue Ventures. Hello, Dr. Anna. How are you? You're currently muted.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Sorry, I'm a little late.
Not a problem.
Good to see you.
I'm very glad you're here.
Hmm.
Okay, well, I, by the way, am Rob Hutchins, community editor here at Oceanographic, and my role is to be asking all the questions this afternoon, which isn't strictly true because, as with all of these roundtable discussions, it really is over to you guys to offer you the chance to ask your questions and fill a part of the conversation too. So please do ask your questions throughout the next 30 minutes of chat, and we will work to ask those questions for you. Right. I feel like I've said a lot in the last 5 minutes, so I'm ready to zip my mouth and listen to the experts now on this topic. So I'm going to start by setting a question for both of you. So this is to both of you guys. So your research challenges the idea that bottom trawling is essential to global food security. What was the most surprising finding across your 9 case studies in this report? If we start with you, Professor Rashid.
Rashid, did you want to go?
Anna, go for it. Oh, yeah.
So for me, the most surprising is, I think it was the consistency across the case studies we looked at, where we have the same problems, where the big industrial bottom trawling fisheries come into the same waters the small scale coastal communities depend on. Because one of the big narratives that the global food supply coming from bottom trawling comes from like the big ocean, and the oceans are vast and there's so much space and they catch the fish in all these like big ocean waters, but they're coming really close to shore everywhere, and that the communities struggle the same around the world, whether that was in Kenya or in Indonesia or in Alaska, in the Northwest, or in Scotland as well. There's very similar struggles between the coastal communities and the industrial fishing sector as such. I think that was, for me, the consistency across those case studies was one of the big surprises, or the biggest finding.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, that's great, Anna. And we made sure that we also had case studies in the developed north, not only in the global south. To be able to say what Anna just said is because we have case studies in Alaska and other parts of the developed world. So this is universal. And part of the thing, what is also surprising, but not so surprising to me, is that a lot of the competition is also fueled by subsidies, and our work has shown that. The two of us have looked into this for years now, where we see that the bulk of the subsidies that is given by governments to the fishing sector actually goes to the large industrial fleets, which the bottom trawlers are a big part, right? We're talking about 80-20. About 80% of all the subsidies goes to large scale industrial fleets. So that is society actually helping to fuel the competition that Anna just mentioned.
Hey, look, I didn't get a chance to say this before we all came live, but congratulations on bringing this report to light and bringing all this evidence forwards and presenting the counter argument to this long-held industry argument that we need bottom trawling, which clearly, evidently, it's such a detriment not only to the environment but also now to societies and communities that depend on these fish the most. So within the study, you describe a pattern of negative competition between industrial trawlers and small-scale fisheries. I wonder if you could explain what that looks like on the ground and why it has been allowed to persist for so long.
Should I start, Rashid, or you want to go first?
No, Anna, you go. I always give you the floor because you did the digging of the data. So go ahead, please.
So the negative competition, so that's kind of like what I was just mentioning, that was the kind of that pattern we found across. So that is on different levels. So we can have competition directly in the space, where there's like big bottom trawling in India, for example, in Goa and in West Bengal. The bottom trawlers, they come really close into shore, and there's literally not enough space for the small-scale fisheries to navigate, because they come often with these pair trawlers. So you can imagine there's like 2 boats and a big trawl net in between, and that looks, they describe, or the fishers would describe, as like a big wall comes kind of like towards you, right? So that's one thing that you can't even navigate. They destroy gear as well by kind of trawling through and not paying attention. That was reported in the west coast of Scotland as well, that they would destroy, like, or come into the zones where the creel, the trap fisheries was happening, and the trawlers would come through and not really paying attention. And then that would lead to gear destruction. There's market as well, displacement. So the big bottom trawl, they bring so much volume of fish. Lots of it goes to export market, but some of the bycatch will land at local markets, and that undermines like prices as well, and just like the local trading. Yeah, those are just a few examples of that negative competition, and then it goes down the value chain in different components as well. Rashid, do you want to add something?
Yeah. Two little additions here. Little, but not so little. Okay. Yeah. The first one is competition on specific species. They target the species that small-scale fishers also target. And this is, we're beginning to publish work that we did. We were looking at what areas and what species distant water fishing fleets take when they go to places like West Africa or Latin America and Southeast Asia. And there is a lot of, because they target very valuable fish, right, to make the economics work. And in some cases, and then that is competition direct on the species. And this spills over into competition at the ecological level, because it's not just about the taking of the fish. What do you do to the ecosystem, to the biomass that is remaining? So a lot of overfishing is really fueled by this. Now, when you take all this in Ghana, West Africa, Ghana is one of the case studies. This thing was so bad, and the policy people realized this to the extent that they just managed to pass a law that have pushed large-scale fishing vessels back away from 6 nautical miles. Used to be the point at which no industrial fleet can go in. Now they've extended it to 12 nautical miles because of the competition they see. So this is very real, and they managed to pass that bill, and it's good to see that. Now, finally, there is also competition for small pelagic species. In West Africa, this is a big thing. And what do they do with this? When they catch them, they grind them into fish meal and oil, send them to China or to Norway or to where these flesh-eating farms are. And so you have in Gambia, China, for example, is planting fish meal plants. And that is really dangerous, because these small pelagics are very important for the nutrition and food security of people in these regions. So that's another competition there, where farm fish are competing with real people who need macronutrients to have a nutritious food. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing the insight there, Anna, and yourself, Rashid. And I wonder, just going back to that one point that you made there, actually, the moving of that, pushing that zone out from 6 nautical miles to 12, which is great. It's a great development. But why has it taken so long for that to? Why, for awareness, firstly, to be raised and for the action to be taken in that region? But then, if we extrapolate that and look at that globally, why is it taking so long, or why has this persisted for so long?
Yeah, Anna, maybe I'll quickly take this and you can add on. You know, I think there are a number of factors, and some of them are not intentionally, they are not done with malice. They're not done for, it's just that when you are locked in the system, it's really hard to unlock it. I mean, there are pressures, there are lobbies, there are all that. So we need to give that credit. But apart from that, is industrial power, is the ability to just keep the system where it is to benefit those who are currently benefiting. And so it's very difficult to unlock that. So that is also a potential reason for this. We know, they say follow the money, right? I mean, you have politics, you need money, campaigning, and all those things really lead to the people not getting what they want. It's the money that gets what it wants, right? So there you go. Yeah.
No, yeah, it's totally right. Anything to add there? Any thoughts to add on to that one, Dr. Anna?
Yeah, so also I think I remember you just had a podcast about marine protected areas as well a couple of weeks ago or something, and it's about the paper parks too, right? So then you have kind of an enforcement in place and a zone in place, but there is no budget from the government to actually enforce it. So let alone to expand the area. So whatever they have right now is written in some policy at some point in the past. And in most cases, it's not enforced to begin with. And then even if the community is trying to push for enforcement or push for bigger zones or more explicit demarcation of the zones, it all goes hand in hand. And if you don't have that political will to begin with, to even send a couple patrol boats down to those coastlines to enforce anything, they have like those nice, pretty policies on paper. Yeah, it's even like another step then to try to have it into actually a proper zone.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, if I may quickly add, since Anna has mentioned marine protected areas, one of the things that really, if I may say, outrages me is the idea of bottom trawlers being allowed in marine protected areas. This is the most crazy thing I can even imagine. You say you are protecting a place and you allow bottom trawling in there. It just doesn't make sense at all. And yet it's happening not in small countries, poor countries, but in rich ones. This is a big thing in France, for example, and there's been an effort. It's still going on, and it's just unbelievable.
No.
Yeah, in New Zealand as well, where we had our case study. And New Zealand is often put very high up when you talk about management and how well they're managing their fisheries, and it's used in many cases as an example, yet they still have bottom trawling in their marine protected area happening as well.
Yeah, no, it's madness, and it's maddening. But actually, there was in the report, I believe there was a case where actually the enforcement was working, and I believe this was in Brazil. I hope I got that right. And but to ask you, what made the difference there, and why isn't that model being replicated more widely?
That's a really good question. And Brazil has been our golden case here, and giving us a lot of hope and a lot of motivation to a lot of places. And I think it is a matter of the right political window, the right people that are pushing for that. And like in Ghana as well, it's a very positive example. It's all moving like in incredibly right direction at the moment because all the people come together, right? And they're really pushing for it. So the government has no chance anymore to really say no unless they will lose their vote in their next elections. And I think in Brazil, it was a little special because the bottom trawlers that came into their in the state of, so it's the state of Rio Grande do Sul, it's the southernmost state of Brazil, and the bottom trawling boats that came into their waters were from the neighboring state. And so the local government of Rio Grande do Sul, together with the fishing industry and the NGOs, really pushed those trawlers out because they were not benefiting directly the local population as such, but the neighboring state population, right? And so that was helpful. There was a lot of lawyers involved that I think through an organization called Oceana, they had their offices in Brazil and some other organizations there. So it wasn't just the local people, but there was also some push through lawyers and to really make it into a legal push. They had a big pushback in 2023. So that since 2018, they have banned the trawlers and to 12 nautical miles outside their zone. And in 2023, the industry, and I think even the federal government, tried to push back quite a bit, but they weren't able to. So they won that now. So it's properly protected now. It's in the law.
Oh, what a fantastic sort of standard bearer for what we can achieve, and actually the power that we utilize in that enforcement. We got I want to just mention I've got pages of questions here to dive into this fascinating report. But this is a time for our audience to have their questions shared as well. And we got one from Charlie, who was very complimentary, saying this is so interesting. Can we actually reach that 30 by 30 goal if we don't properly ban bottom trawling inside those areas, alluding to those marine protected areas? What are your thoughts there, Professor Rashid?
I'm sorry, I was reading a little note. So can you repeat the question?
Of course. It was, can we actually reach the 30 by 30 goal if we don't properly ban bottom trawling inside those marine protected areas?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, you really have to take, what is bottom trawling? Essentially, it is putting heavy gear on the sea floor and trying to catch what you want to catch. So that's why many of us don't like it. It's almost like bulldozing through a habitat or a place, right? You don't do that. It's not selective. It can knock off habitats that are really took longs of time to create, like sea mounts and so on. So you cannot. In fact, some of us are getting to a point where we say you cannot have a sustainable fishery when you have bottom trawling. So this is not about MPAs. We're talking about fishing everywhere, right? And one thing we haven't even talked about is the bycatch problem. One of the things that sensitized me was a trip I was taking to Senegal. And when the End of the Line movie, many of you will know this on the audience, End of the Line movie, Charles Clover, right, led us to do that. And they flew me to Dakar. One evening we're following a bottom trawling vessel looking for shrimp and to see how they operate. My God, what was the most disturbing thing was the amount of discards. They catch the fish because it's not shrimp. They want to fill their boat with valuable shrimp. They just throw this fish off like that. And it came to a point we started collecting the fish because it was so bad. And we came to the coast and the villagers had a feast. There was a barbecue, good fish, nutritious fish, but they're high graded, right? So there's a lot about this way of fishing that in the modern fishing world, we should probably not have it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I've just spotted a question from Bob, but before I go on to that one, because I think it's quite a spicy question, I really want to dive into the one aspect or a community that is deeply affected but overlooked oftentimes is, and the research highlights, is the disproportionate impact on women across fisheries values chains. How has gender been overlooked in fisheries governance, and what would genuinely gender sensitive policy look like in practice?
That's a really big question. And yes, that was one of the big findings we had, that the gendered impact. So impact from bottom trawling. So we looked at food security specifically, right? And so there's a lot of women that work in the post-harvest sector. That means the fish gets landed at the beach landing site or the small ports, and the women dry trade and handle the processing of the fish for it to be sold. And that's, as we already discovered over the last years through big projects from the FAO and UBC, the Sea Around Us, and the Duke University, the Hidden Harvest project, that a massive percentage of women work in that sector that are not actually officially counted in the statistics to begin with. So it's this kind of invisible impact on that group, because you only look at the fishery specifically, at the competition for the species and what's happening on the ocean, and not so much what's happening on land. And so what we found is that now this fish is being caught by the bottom trawlers and brought to auction sites, to export markets, or like Rashid mentioned, to fish meal industry. And the women are not able to find jobs there, right? They're local, they are where the communities are, so they lose their livelihood and their opportunities. How can you put that into practice, into policies? I think it's a big challenge, because at the moment we don't even have food security as a component in fisheries policies to begin with. So there's already a massive gap when we look at policies. There's food security policies that are really tied to the agricultural sector, and there's fisheries management policies that are much more tied to the environmental impact and the maximum yield you can get from these fisheries. And the food security should be part of the fisheries policies to begin with, because fish, as we all know, is massively important for food. And so I don't know, maybe Rashid, you have a little something, an idea of how the gender aspects can be included a bit better. I think it's to first bring up that invisible workforce to the actual real statistics to begin with. And then we need to go from there, I assume.
Yeah, no, this is great, Anna. You know, two quick points. Number one, going back to subsidies, $22 billion, our latest estimate. We are working to improve that, to update that estimate. 22 billion goes to do what we call harmful subsidies, overfishing subsidies, if you like. And this goes over 80% in that case. The total is 80%, but over 80% of the harmful goes to large-scale industrial fleet, including bottom trawlers. Now, how many women fish in the small scale versus large scale? Most women actually are small-scale fishers. So automatically, our taxes are going to aggravate gender inequality by giving the money more to the boats that men actually run. So that is one thing. So take out the subsidies, and you would already start leveling the playing ground for women, right? So that is one example. Another example, a hopeful one, is we have another project called Solving the Sustainability Challenges at the Nexus of Food Security, Climate Change, and Biodiversity. And the question we're asking is, how can you feed 10 billion people soon in the face of climate change, you know, without destroying biodiversity? Huge challenge question that we have. But in there, we are doing case studies, and I'm mentioning this because of an example that I found to be hopeful. We are in 5 continents. We are in West Africa, we are in Costa Rica for Latin America, in China for agriculture, and we are in Canada, indigenous management, and in the Netherlands for circular economy considerations. And the thing that hit me when we're having one of our meetings, the West Africans were talking a lot about gender inequality and how to deal with this. And our Costa Rican people were blown away. They said, oh my God, in Costa Rica, nobody talks about gender. Fish is fish, it's all about men. So actually they organized a side workshop to learn from the West Africans. And I think that is a good example what cross-fertilization and sharing of knowledge can lead to. So they're learning, they're trying to bring gender lens into Costa Rican fisheries management as an example, a hopeful example for you.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for actually sharing those thoughts there on that question. I'm just seeing we're getting a few questions from people tuning in now. So one from Bob that I'm going to tie into one of the questions that I had written previously for you guys. So Bob's asking, where are the bottom trawlers coming from and what countries are most to blame? But let's add on to that. Let's expand that. And could you explain the dynamic of mining the protein of the global south to feed wealthier countries? And what does this mean in practice? And what implications does it have on coastal communities impacted as a result?
So, Rashid, do you want me to start? Or?
Please, Anna, go ahead. Yeah.
So we looked that's very dependent on the case studies, of course. So like in India, for example, it's mostly Indian trawlers. So from their own national countries that are like coming into the small scale fisheries kind of zones. But if we look at the case studies, that can be very specific. But if you want to look at a more global picture, it's quite clear because you have the most bottom trawled kind of species groups in the world are groundfish like hake, like pollock, and cod. And then the other kind of biggest group are shrimp. So those are kind of the 2 biggest fish groups. So if we look at the first groundfish, ones like the hake, the pollock, and the cod, they all feed the global north market. So that's the European Union, that's North America, that's Japan, China, and Korea. And then the shrimp, and they're being fished in a lot of different places, a lot in Namibia, in Chile, Peru, like where there's like big upwelling systems. Then we have, but also in like Alaska for the pollock, and Russia and Greenland, Canada for the cod. But they very rarely are eaten in the places where they are being fished, volume-wise. And then when we look at shrimp, it gets even more extreme, because the shrimp in the countries where it's fished, like the story from Rashid in Senegal, that shrimp does not get eaten in Senegal, that gets exported likely to China or to Korea or to the European Union. So there's mostly the tropical shrimp that has a lot of big bycatch as well, and that's exported. In Ghana, actually, which I didn't even know before, it's cuttlefish, that there is the target species from the bottom trawlers that gets exported to China. And then it gets more complicated when you ask where do those trawlers actually come from, because they're often flagged from different countries where they actually are from. Like the Ghana example, because in Ghana, there's no foreign companies allowed. There is a Ghanaian-headed company that is run by Chinese and funded and financed by Chinese, and everybody knows that and talks about that. And so the vessels are built in China, their officers are Chinese, and they hire maybe 10 to 20 people from Ghana as the crew. So, and that happens in a lot of places. And then, so maybe the owners are from one place from one country, then the crew often comes from another country. Like I used to work in the Falkland Islands as a fisheries observer on board bottom trawling vessels, and there would be flagged Spanish, and they had like 3 Spanish officers on board, and the rest was Filipino or Chilean crew. And they would catch fish off the coast of the Falkland Islands, and that would be exported to China or Korea. So it was it's very complicated.
Yeah, very good. So maybe very quickly, I mean, Anna, you've given us a very nice overview of how this could play. So I would maybe stress on the impact of this, the flow of fish from the global south to the global north in general. I mean, there are cases where it's the reverse. Like, for example, Nigeria imports a lot of fish, right? So that's a special case. But in general, that's the direction of flow. And the consequences of this is what actually also bothers me. The thing is, the fish get visa immediately to go to the north. I mean, Namibia Hague, within a few hours of landing in the Namibian coast, is in a plate somewhere in Portugal or France or Italy, or where have you, right? So the fish get visa, but let an African try to get visa to go to Portugal or France, right? So this is the thing. And this is not only about fish, it's about all the raw materials, the commodities that just fly out and leave the Africans and other developing country people dry. And so what will they do? People don't just sit down and die. So you have people trying forced migration. That's one of the reasons for forced migration. So I tell people, if you don't want forced migration, then we, those who have the ability, should actually ensure that life is livable everywhere in the world. That's the only solution. If people are tight, they go. Even the fish, when the surface water is warm, they try to go with cool water. That's where fish are moving to the ports, right? So living things do that. So let's all work to make sure that the resources in places actually works to support people's lives in those places. Then you reduce forced migration and everybody will be happier. The Europeans don't have to build walls. The Americans don't have to build walls, because there's no need to run away. Come on, guys.
No, great. Great insight. And actually, since we're with you, Professor, maybe we can dive into this subject of subsidies here a little bit. And obviously, the study calls for subsidies to be redirected from those capacity enhancing support towards small scale fisheries. But given how entrenched subsidy structures are where do you see the realistic sort of leverage points for that level of reform? How realistic is that?
Anna, do you think? What do you think, Anna?
No,
You
go,
want to
go.
go?
No, go for it, Rashid.
Yeah, you know, it's really tough. I mean, I see why you are asking the question. It's not easy to pull it back because, as usual, once people start getting the benefit, it becomes an entitlement, right? It's hard to take it, and politically too. So we recognize that. But the antidote to that is actually pressure. Is people, is journalists, is scientists, is civil society, NGOs, some politicians, because some politicians will ring me and say, keep doing what you're doing. We need the data. We need you guys to talk. So that gives us the ability to actually argue for this politically. So there are all sorts of well-meaning people in all groups, businesses also, actually. I was asked to give a talk at the APEC Business Forum about subsidies, right? The businesses who see that this is harmful to them all, right? So let's garner all these goodwill people to try to push back. And you can see for the first time we got a WTO agreement. I mean, many of us think it's just the beginning because it doesn't ban overfishing subsidies directly. But hey, and they are now working on fish too to try to get that in place. So let's keep pushing them. It's only the people can get this done. You know, we have to put the pressure on. Otherwise, yeah, it's really difficult. So it's a call to all of us to really make sure our taxes are used to support nature and therefore support the people, not to undermine nature by harming it, which ultimately means harming people, right? Because who loses when there's no fish? You lose. There's no seafood for you, no fish jobs, no fish dollars. So ultimately, we have to protect the fish because we want to protect ourselves also. I know there's the intrinsic value, which I subscribe to, but just thinking about people, for the sake of people, we cannot destroy our ecosystems and natural systems because I tell you, it's not going to be good for us. Already we are seeing it around the world, right? Malnutrition, flooding, and all that. So thank you, but
Yeah. So, Professor, thank you for that. But just since we're with you, and in your view, and I think I can hazard a guess at what your response might be to this one, but as one of the world's leading fisheries economists, is industrial bottom trawling right now, as it is currently being practiced, is it economically rational, or is this a system that is actually being kept alive quite artificially? Is it being propped up by these subsidies?
I'll answer this by giving you a specific study we did. We did a study, and this was years ago actually, published a paper where we looked at industrial bottom trawlers operating in the high and deep sea. We looked at the economics of that. This was published way back before subsidies became topical like this. In 2010, actually, we published. And for the group of vessels we looked at, what we found was that the total profitability on average was 10% of the landed value. That's the gross revenue of the sector, 10%. And then we calculated the subsidies they get. And the number is 15% of landed value. Profit 10%, subsidies 15%. Take away that subsidies, a lot of them will just collapse. They won't be able to fish, right? So that just tells you straight away how we are keeping these vessels going on. And then another study, which was 2018, we published in Science Advances, we discovered that the high seas, 53% of the fishing areas in the high seas will not be profitable if not for subsidies and also modern slave labor, people being carried along, paid very little, bad social conditions. If not for that, 53% of the high seas will not be viable economically. So, hey, this is all propped up.
Thank you for that honest answer as well. Thank you so much. Look, very conscious of time, but I want to make sure that I get Catherine's question asked here. And I'm going to direct this one to you, Dr. Anna. And Catherine asks, where these techniques are still allowed, do you think we should be pushing for innovation in gear designs, i.e. sleds on bottom-towed dredges, to minimize benthic impact, or is this just encouraging their long-term use?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. And we discussed this quite a lot. And yes, there's a lot of places in the world where they already do that and where they try to put a lot of changes to the bottom trawlers so the impacts are less. But that kind of comes back to what we just talked about, the whole financing, economic profitability situation. So the more you do this, the more expenses you will have, the more gear modification those boats will become, and high tech. And in most places in the world, first of all, there's no possibility. They don't have those funds to do so to begin with. And yes, maybe in the global north, in some places, they call them sustainably managed bottom trawlers because they have those devices on board that they're using. But there's just a few countries and a few places where you can see that work, the rest of the world not. And then again, like if those fisheries are not profitable without subsidies to begin with, or what Rashid just mentioned, without modern slavery, or with like substitute, like support to all these things, then injecting more money and more technological changes doesn't really help the long run. So I feel, yeah, you can throw more money at it and try to make it better, but will that catch more fish where there is not enough fish to begin with? Probably not. It will destroy the habitat floor maybe a little less, but it's already destroyed in so many places, and we have climate change and all other threats as well happening. Unlikely that this can be a long-term solution anywhere, I think. And yeah, but kind of to think about the whole industry, we also looked at where bottom trawling could potentially support food security, right? We didn't just want to do this whole study and just looking at the small-scale fisheries that are being outcompeted, and but also, and it has to be very specific, right? There's only very specific limited condition the bottom trawler has to provide to be able to supply food to the people who actually need it. And in none of the case studies where we looked at, this is the case. In none of the case studies, the bottom trawling is sustainable and has these gear solutions in place. It doesn't really exist there. So yeah, if that helps.
It does. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Hey, look, I'm just so conscious of time. I don't want to be taking up too much of your afternoon. I really appreciate the energy and insight and expertise that you've shared so far. So just to ask one closing question to both of you, and I'd love to get both of your thoughts on this. So if you could change one thing, be that one policy, one practice, or one international agreement that would have the greatest impact on the issues that this research raises, what would that be? If we start with yourself, Professor Rashid.
Yeah, I think we should work hard, push our governments to get fish 2 through. That is the next subsidies agreement, because they're working to say that no subsidy should go to any vessel that can lead to overfishing. So we don't want overfishing to take place. That could be one concrete thing we can do to help. Yeah.
Great. And yourself, Dr. Anna?
That's a really tough question. I agree with Rashid 100%. I think that's going to be a big one. And then I'm also always thinking from the people perspective, right? That's not necessarily an international agreement, but if we want to push for 30 by 30, if we want to protect our oceans, I really think we need to work with the people who are most impacted. So to having those intra-exclusion zones, the preferential access areas for small-scale fishing communities who need the fish for food, these people need to be involved in our policy making. These people need to prioritize what do they need from the ocean to survive and make this into something workable. Work with the people, help them organize and have it from the bottom up. So think in places like Brazil and Ghana, where the big bottom trawlers can be excluded. These zones are contributing to 30 by 30, right? Like get those agendas together, the biodiversity, 30 by 30, fisheries, food security, and listen to the people, what they need.
Absolutely. Oh, look, thank you both so much. I feel like we've had a very broad discussion here, a broad spectrum of the topics that have been covered in the research that you guys have delivered. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. I think it's a discussion that could go on and on and on. But we all have lives to live and things to do this afternoon, so I can't keep you here forever. But thank you for sharing your insight and your energy and your time and all those expertise to answer all those questions. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who has tuned in to listen and watch at home or wherever you are. If you've enjoyed this roundtable session, be sure to come back next week when we will tackle next week's biggest story at the same time and same place. And do check out the Oceanographic platform for your latest details on the Ocean Talks live events, as well as our printed magazine and everything else we have to offer. So that leaves me with nothing more to say than have a wonderful, wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Ta-ta.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.